338 BC. In central Greece lies a small valley called Chaeronea. Here, thousands of soldiers stand in their formations. Dust rises into the air, metal clashes against metal, and there hangs that strange silence in the atmosphere that comes before every great battle. On one side stand the combined forces of two renowned Greek cities, Athens and Thebes, who for centuries have taken pride in their freedom and their democratic traditions. On the other side stands a man who has grown tired of being called a barbarian, Philip II, King of Macedonia. And beside him, mounted on his horse, holding his first major command, stands an 18-year-old youth whose name the world will never forget, Alexander. This was not merely a clash of two armies, it was the beginning of a new era. What happened that day would forever end the 1,000-year-old system of Greece's free city-states, and would introduce the world to the man who would go on to conquer nearly the entire known world. This is the story of the Battle of Chaeronea. To understand why Chaeronea mattered so much, we need to step back a little. Ancient Greece was not a single nation the way we think of nations today. It was a collection of hundreds of small city-states, known as polis, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth, and many others, each with its own government, its own army, and its own system. Athens was the cradle of democracy, where ordinary citizens gathered to make decisions together and took part in politics. Sparta was the complete opposite, a militaristic society where children were trained as warriors from birth, and the purpose of life itself was considered to be military service. Thebes, too, was a powerful state, home to a special unit called the Sacred Band, 150 pairs, that is 300 soldiers, bound together by deep personal bonds. This unit had been formed decades earlier by a Theban commander who believed that men who loved each other would never abandon one another in battle. And true to that belief, the Sacred Band had never once been defeated on the field. These states fought each other constantly, sometimes over land, sometimes over resources, and sometimes simply over honor. The Peloponnesian War, which lasted from 431 to 404 BC, left Athens and Sparta so weakened by fighting each other that the entire Greek world was left exhausted. This long war badly damaged the Greek cities' finances, their military strength, and their unity with one another. This very weakness would open the door to a new threat rising from the north, a state that the Greeks did not yet recognize as truly Greek. Macedonia was a mountainous and relatively backward region to the north of Greece. Its people spoke Greek and worshipped the same gods as the rest of Greece. Yet the true Greeks, Athens and Sparta among them, looked down on them and considered them half-barbarian. In 359 BC, Philip II became king of Macedonia, at a time when his kingdom was weak, its borders under threat, and neighboring tribes hostile. Many believed Macedonia would soon collapse. But Philip proved to be an extraordinary and sharp-minded ruler. He had spent his youth as a hostage in Thebes, where he closely observed the military tactics considered the finest of the age, particularly those of the Theban commander Epaminondas. This very experience planted the foundation in Philip's mind that would later turn the Macedonian army into the most fearsome fighting force in the world. He made fundamental revolutionary changes to his army. First, he created the Macedonian phalanx, ranks of soldiers wielding 6-meter-long spears called sarissas, far longer than the ordinary spears used by other Greek armies. Because the spears of the front several ranks could all reach past the first line at once, an enemy trying to close the distance faced a wall of iron points before their own weapons could even land a blow. Second, he made the army permanent and professional. Previously, Greek armies were often composed of ordinary farmers called up only in times of war, who would return home when it was time to harvest their crops, leaving the army lacking in training and experience. Philip changed this practice, building a standing, well-trained force that drilled together year-round and fought as a single disciplined unit rather than a crowd of part-time soldiers. Third, he made cavalry, the mounted force, a central part of the army, later named the companion cavalry, which would become the single most crucial weapon in Alexander's future conquests. With these reforms, Philip gradually began conquering the states surrounding Macedonia. Thessaly fell under his control, then Thrace, and after that his kingdom spread across the northern regions of Greece. With every conquest, Philip's army grew stronger still, and his treasury grew richer, particularly because of Thrace's gold mines, which gave him the means to pay and arm his soldiers better than any rival. When Philip's gaze finally turned toward central Greece, Athens and Thebes realized that if they did not unite to stop him, their thousand-year-old freedom would be lost forever. Meanwhile, Philip's son Alexander was growing up. From childhood, Alexander displayed extraordinary qualities, not just physical strength, but a sharp mind and remarkable self-confidence. A famous story tells that when he was only 13, he tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus that no experienced or grown rider could control. Others had already declared the horse impossible to tame, but Alexander noticed that the horse was bolting because it was frightened by its own shadow. So he turned the horse to face the sun, so that its shadow fell behind it, and then rode it with ease. Philip, watching in astonishment, is said to have told his son, "My boy, find yourself another kingdom. Macedonia is too small for you." For Alexander's education, Philip chose the most learned man of the era, Aristotle, himself a student of Plato, who would go on to become one of the towering names in the history of philosophy. Aristotle taught Alexander philosophy, medicine, science, and politics, and in particular Homer's epic The Iliad, whose hero Achilles became Alexander's favorite figure, a man whose courage and glory he always longed to emulate. This education was not merely academic, it was meant to instill in Alexander's mind the belief that only those with truly great ambition accomplish truly great things. But the most valuable education Alexander received was on the battlefield itself. Philip took his son along on his military campaigns, taught him strategy and logistics, and gradually assigned him small responsibilities so he could gain hands-on experience. By 338 BC, Philip was convinced that his 18-year-old son was capable of shouldering a major responsibility, and he decided that in the coming decisive battle, Alexander would be given command of a critical part of the army. Athens and Thebes, setting aside their centuries-old rivalry and competition, formed a combined force to stop Philip's advance. This was the extraordinary moment when two of the greatest rivals united against a common enemy. Corinth, Megara, and a few other smaller states joined this alliance as well, bringing together a reasonably large force. The Greek alliance's army numbered roughly 35,000 soldiers. Philip's Macedonian army was similarly large, according to some historians' estimates roughly between 30 and 32,000. The two armies met face-to-face on the field at Chaeronea, located in the region of Boeotia, near Thebes. This was a narrow valley, bordered on one side by mountains and on the other by the Cephisus River, making it difficult for large armies to spread out. For this very reason, both sides accepted this location, so that their lines would clash directly against one another and superior numbers would matter less than discipline and tactics. The Greek alliance arranged its army so that the Thebans stood on the right wing, including the sacred band, considered the strongest and most reliable part of the force. The left wing and center were held by the Athenians and soldiers from the other smaller cities, most of whom were not experienced fighters but ordinary citizens. Philip organized his army so that he himself stood on the right wing with his best and most experienced soldiers. On the left wing, he gave his 18-year-old son Alexander command of the companion cavalry, though as a precaution he also placed a few experienced generals alongside him, so they could assist if needed. This was an enormous test for Alexander. For the first time, he had been given such a major responsibility, and that too, in direct confrontation with the strongest Theban force, the Sacred Band, a unit that had never lost a single battle to that day. The battle, in the morning. The two lines slowly advanced toward one another, and then came the violent clash. The clang of swords, the thrust of spears, the noise of shields, and the cries of the wounded echoed throughout the valley. For hours, both sides fought an even contest, with neither gaining a clear advantage. During this time, Philip executed a clever and dangerous maneuver. He deliberately ordered his right wing, where he himself stood, to begin withdrawing, as though they were losing and abandoning the field. This was in fact a calculated deception. The Athenian soldiers, who were not experienced professional fighters but mostly ordinary citizens who had come to the field to defend their city, fell for the trick. Believing the Macedonians were being defeated and fleeing, they pressed forward eagerly to secure what they thought was victory. As the Athenian lines advanced rapidly, a problem began to emerge. The Thebans, positioned on the right, held their ground firmly and steadily, while the Athenians surged ahead. Because of this gap in pace, an empty space opened up between the Athenian and Theban lines. This was the very moment Philip had been waiting for. Alexander, standing on the other side of the field with his companion cavalry, spotted this opening immediately. Without wasting a moment and without hesitation, he charged his cavalry straight into the gap. This was a bold and extremely dangerous decision. Had the maneuver failed, or had the enemy noticed the charge in time, the entire Macedonian left wing could have been destroyed, and the outcome of the whole battle could have been reversed. But Alexander demonstrated extraordinary courage and decisiveness in this moment. His cavalry broke through the gap and encircled the sacred band from behind. The sacred band, Thebes' strongest and most loyal military unit, which had never learned to retreat, suddenly found itself surrounded from both sides. The Macedonian phalanx pressed from the front, while Alexander's cavalry struck an unexpected blow from behind. Even in this dire situation, the sacred band allowed no stain on its reputation. Rather than flee, they chose to stand their ground and fight to the very end. Most of the soldiers were killed there, refusing outright to break formation or abandon their comrades. It is said that by the time the battle ended, all 300 men of the sacred band were either dead or lay severely wounded on the field. Their loyalty and courage became so renowned that Philip himself, upon seeing their bodies lying on the battlefield, is said to have been moved to tears and to have openly praised their bravery. Meanwhile, Philip turned his main force back around and struck the Athenian army with full force, which by now had broken its formation and scattered. The Athenians too suffered a crushing defeat. Within just a few hours, the battle ended decisively in Macedonia's favor. The Greek alliance was completely defeated. Thousands of soldiers were killed on the field, and many were taken prisoner, among them the famous Athenian orator Demosthenes, the alliance's greatest champion and the man most responsible for rallying it, though he himself had fled the battlefield. Philip took full advantage of this decisive victory and forced all of Greece to acknowledge his supremacy, with the sole exception of Sparta, which, though undefeated, chose silence and refused under any circumstances to submit to Philip's authority. In 336 BC, just 2 years after this victory, Philip formed the Corinth League, a union of Greek city-states that recognized Macedonian leadership and appointed Philip as its hegemon, or leader. The League's shared goal was a major mission, an invasion of Persia, which had for centuries been the old enemy of the Greek cities. But Philip himself never got the chance to carry out this mission. That same year, during the celebration of his daughter's wedding, Philip was assassinated, and some historians suspect a political conspiracy lay behind the killing. His 20-year-old son Alexander now ascended the throne, the same Alexander who, in his very first battle at Chaeronea, had proven his extraordinary military ability by destroying the sacred band. The Battle of Chaeronea was not merely another battle, it was a turning point that changed the entire course of history. After this battle, free states like Athens and Thebes never regained their former strength, and their 1,000-year-old freedom and independence were lost forever. A kingdom once dismissed as barbarian now became the ruler of the entire Greek world. Most importantly, this battle showed the world that Alexander possessed extraordinary military ability. This was the very foundation on which he would go on, in the years that followed, to write the story of his conquests across Persia, Egypt, and Central Asia. The mission Philip had begun through the Corinthian League would be carried forward by Alexander, and the war Philip himself had wished to fight would instead be fought by his son, but on a scale the world had never witnessed before. Even today, a famous stone lion still stands in the valley of Chaeronea. known as the Lion of Chaeronea. It is said to have been built in memory of the fallen soldiers of the sacred band. For centuries, this monument lay broken and half-buried, and it was only in the 19th century that archaeologists excavated the site nearby and found a mass grave containing the remains of about 254 men, arranged in neat rows, believed by many historians to be the soldiers of the sacred band itself. The lion was later restored, and now stands once again over that same ground. It still bears witness to that day when an 18-year-old changed the course of history in his very first battle. This was not merely Alexander's first victory, it was the first step of the journey that would transform him into the greatest conqueror the world had ever known. In the years that followed, this same young man would lead his armies into Persia, Egypt, and India, forever altering the course of history. But it all began here, in the dusty valley of Chaeronea, in 338 BC.